Hello, this is Dr. Michael Greger coming to you live from my treadmill as I do every month. This is a special Q&A session. The regular Q&As will be next week. The regularly scheduled Q&As on both Facebook and here on YouTube. But I just gave a COVID-19 webinar, supposed to be 2 hours and went on 4 hours. There was just so much science to relay to folks. And so a Q&A got cut short. So I promised everyone, there were 5,000 attendees on the webinar. We maxed out our Zoom upper limit. I promised everyone I would do 2 full hours of Q&A this week. Today, I just did an hour at noon Eastern time on Facebook Live. You can still go to NutritionFacts.org Facebook page and rewatch it and watch it if you missed it earlier on. And of course, today, right now, we will do an hour here on YouTube Live. So a few quick announcements. First, I will be doing another webinar, a COVID-19 webinar with some updated information covering the same body of material on May 27th. Now, usually, so basically the difference between the last webinar and this next webinar is by then I'll have some nice polished videos. Normally my webinars are just kind of a sneak previews of what's coming up in NutritionFacts.org. Well, I'm going to do a whole month-long series of videos on COVID-19. And so I'm going to have them all ready, queued up, and so I can play them kind of back to back all at once. So you can see them come up, and then we'll do another live Q&A. Of course, the videos are going to be up. It's just kind of a sneak preview. And normally it's kind of a suggested donation, even though everything eventually free on the site. There's a suggested donation, but this as a public service, this webinar is going to be completely free. I mean, they're always free, but suggested donation, but no suggested donation. May 27th. Make sure you are signed up, subscribe to the newsletter, NutritionFacts.org, which of course is free as well. But there's only 5,000 people, so you have to be of the first 5,000 to register. Okay, so and I believe we'll be sending out the registration link a week from today. So make sure you subscribe to NutritionFacts.org newsletter before next Thursday. And you get the registration link. First 5,000 to sign up will be able to attend. Okay, and the announcement, that's going to be one day after the release of my new book, How to Survive a Pandemic, May 26th. Physical copies will not be available till the fall, but audiobook and ebook are being fast-tracked, should be up May 26th. I'm going to be actually recording the audiobook in 2 weeks. Of course, we have to write it by then. So this is a very busy time for me, but I'm excited to be able to use my infectious disease background to jump back into the pandemic fray, as that's what I spent the first half of my professional life doing before I switched over to lifestyle medicine and looked at chronic disease as opposed to infectious disease. All right, so another webinar. And so for this is going to be a special COVID-19 pandemic general questions. If you have non-pandemic related questions, I asked you to save your questions until next week's general Q&As, but I want this one to be specific for pandemic related questions. And I think that's all that's everything. So let's jump on in. Normally I'd go all the way to the beginning and start at the top, but it looks like before I got on, there was a lot of basically the chat box is where people are asking questions, and there was a lot of chatting back and forth, so there weren't actually questions. But I'm sure there's lots of questions, so I'm going to just jump right in and try to just work sequentially. All right, so Valentine, where'd Valentine just go? Wow, lots of questions being asked. Oh, there we go. Valentina Caldard says, hi, Dr. Greger from Italy. Can you please talk more about the cytokine storm and why and how it develops? Okay, so what is a cytokine storm? So cytokines are cell signaling molecules released by the cells of our immune system to trigger an immune reaction. You know, it's it's really kind of remarkable to recognize that our immune system is, on trigger alert, such that, so for example, this is illustrated for people who have anaphylactic reactions, like peanut allergies or something, severe peanut allergy. One little bit of peanut protein, and boom, you get this cascade of reactions such that your throat can close shut and you can die within minutes. And the moment before you were exposed to that peanut, your body was ready to kill you. It was just waiting for that signal to overreact. Maybe now that's obviously an overreaction. Anaphylaxis is an overreaction, but it shows just how powerful your immune system is and how trigger ready it is. And it has to be, because we have viruses and bacteria that have out-evolved us for hundreds of millions of years and have been around and evolved much faster than we do. And so we have to be ready for anything kind of coming down the pike. And of course, the primary cause of death before chronic disease was infectious disease. Now we have antibiotics, these miracle drugs that can help with bacterial infections, but we're still relying basically on our own immune system to fight off viral infections. Although there are a few antivirals for specific viruses, which are remarkably effective, like the protease inhibitors for HIV, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, but obviously we have nothing like that for COVID-19. No proven specific effective treatment. All we have are supportive treatments like oxygen, et cetera. Okay, so cytokine storm. We're realizing that much of the damage done in severe cases of COVID-19 infection is not the virus itself, but rather our body's reaction to the virus, basically attacking the infected cells along the passageways of our lungs, the air passageways. It's the lining cells that get infected with the virus. So when our body attacks the cells, basically we're destroying our own tissue. Now that's good because we're destroying the virus, but you can see how it's this fine balance. If our body underreacts, the virus can take over. If our body overreacts, then we drown in our own kind of bloody secretions. So, it's kind of in the virus's best evolutionary interest to give us symptoms like coughing, for example, by triggering death in some of the cells in our bronchus and our air passageways. That causes a cough reflex because we want to get rid of that, and that can spread it from one to the other. And so the virus is trying to make us sick. We're trying to attack the virus without causing too much damage. But sometimes this so-called cytokine storm, our immune cells can cause a positive feedback loop such that we have an overreaction and actually do more. And we get kind of caught in the friendly fire of our own body's reaction. And so there has been talk of trying to give, hold on. Maybe my sound is out or something. I'm having a staff member call. Where'd they just go? All right, hold on. I may have, okay. What? Try adjusting your microphone. Sounds like it's crackling. Okay, sorry. Let me make sure I'm on the right mic here. I apologize for that. Microphone. Okay. I should be on this microphone. How about that? Hopefully that sounds good. Let me see if I can find settings. Webcam settings. All right. Is that any better in terms of sound? Let me see. Let me check. My staff is trying to reach me. Still crackling. Oh, okay. It's actually a little better. I'm sorry about that. I think I had my gain turned up too high in my microphone. Anyway, so the reason I brought up cytokine storm earlier, and I was going to say that sometimes there's been consideration of using immunosuppressive drugs like steroids for people fighting COVID-19, but unfortunately, there's mixed data in terms of how effective that was for previous deadly coronavirus outbreaks like SARS, COVID-19. SARS and MERS, for example. And data is mixed for COVID-19 too. And actually, I believe the recommendation is to not use corticosteroids, although I believe they're being used experimentally. But the reason I brought up the whole cytokine storm issue is because, there are all sorts of things we can do to boost parts of our immune system. I have a whole chapter, How Not to Die of Infections. It's like chapter 4 of How Not to Die. I have over 100 videos on foods for immune function on NutritionFacts.org. Like these amazing studies, like people eating broccoli sprouts and beating back the flu virus, randomized controlled trials, significantly not only knocking down viral inflammation and virus loads in the nose, but also boosting natural killer cell activity, these cells that go roaming around the body looking for cancer cells and virus-infected cells to kill. And we can do that with something like broccoli sprouts, but that was for the flu virus, right? Is it good or to boost natural killer cell activity with COVID-19? We just don't know. Maybe that's part of the cytokine storm overreaction that sometimes happens in severe COVID-19 cases. So maybe that would be bad if they were more overactive. So that's why I basically just cautioned that we should take general advice to eat healthy and sleep enough and exercise and stress management to keep our immune system boosted. But before we go trying to specifically boost specific parts of our immune system, we should know better what we're dealing with COVID-19. So increasing your immune system, not necessarily a good thing until we know more. Okay. Anyway, Leslie Brennick says, can you get reinfected? That's an excellent question. If you are one of the 3 rhesus monkeys that was infected with the virus and then tried to be reinfected a month later, they could not be reinfected. And so there was immunity, at least in monkeys, and at least for a month. In terms of people, there certainly have been reports of people who tested positive, then tested negative, then tested positive again. But those cases are likely due to a false negative test in the middle. So they're actually positive all along, but they had a false negative test. If you look at the sensitivity, specificity, some of the tests that are out there now, they may be on the order of 95%, but there's still a 5% chance that the test won't be accurate. And now what the FDA did, because there was such a tremendous failure of early testing in the United States, the FDA basically laid their hands off and said, instead of regulating tests and making sure the tests are actually good and not just total junk, there's a regulatory process for approval. But that actually slowed things down at the beginning. So FDA said hands off. And now there's all sorts of tests. And we don't really know how good they are. And so that may explain some of these positive, negative, positive results. And so that is one of the most important unanswered questions with COVID-19 is how resistant to become after we get it. How immune are we? Do we have to get a really serious case to get immunity? Or can some of these mild cases or even asymptomatic cases acquire immunity? In which case, and if that's not the case, then it would be much more difficult to build up this herd immunity to put a stop to the virus before the vaccine comes around. So we have the convalescent serum data, which I talked about earlier, which suggests that at least short term, early on, there is a protective antibody response. But again, that data is preliminary from non-controlled studies, although it does appear to be useful in those small uncontrolled studies so far. Anyway, so that's potentially a good sign. Okay, COVID-19, IV Winwood says COVID-19 affects blood sugar levels of your blood, both type 1 and 2. I believe maybe IV is reacting to somebody else. Any kind of infection can increase your sugars. Any diabetic knows that when they get sick, their sugars can get all over the place. All of a sudden my chat just refreshed and a whole bunch of new questions. Ricky Jacko says, is it true that animal agriculture meat eating was the cause of COVID-19? Well, so we know from past coronavirus outbreaks, there's 7 human coronaviruses coronaviruses capable of infecting humans and causing sickness. Most of them appear to come from a bat reservoir. So that's the primordial gene pool. But we don't tend to get infected directly from bats. There's, in the case of the last two deadly outbreaks of coronavirus, SARS and MERS in 2002 and 2012, there was an intermediate host which allowed the bat virus to both amplify, to mutate, adapt, in the case of SARS, adapt to humans, and then give rise to human exposure because of these live animal wet markets in China, which allowed, well, in the case of SARS and COVID-19, presumed to be the case in COVID-19, pretty solid to be the case in SARS. In the case of MERS, the intermediate animal was domesticated camels. And so, you can understand this thought, well, if people didn't eat pangolins, so pangolin is considered the most trafficked animal in the world, these scaly anteaters, we have data suggesting that that's the most likely intermediate host. So it was civet cats for SARS, it went bats, civet cats, people. For COVID-19, we think it's bats, pangolins, people. Because we found pangolins, two separate sets of pangolins being smuggled into China, had about 90%, were about 90% identical, but critically in the receptor binding domain, the critical part of the spike protein that binds, that attaches onto human tissues, was over 95%, was about 97, 98%. Anyway, so pangolins look like the prime suspect here. And so if people didn't eat pangolins, their meat is prized as a delicacy because they're so rare. In fact, Chinese pangolins are critically endangered, near extinct. All of the pangolin species are threatened because of this trade. And so if people just didn't eat pangolins, we wouldn't be in the problem we are now. Not necessarily true, because pangolins are also bred, traded, and caged for traditional Chinese medicine. So pangolin scales, just like rhino horn and tiger bones, are used in traditional Chinese medicines. And so, yes, it may have been a pangolin meal, but also been a pangolin medicine. So ironic that people were like trying to, we're in this part of the Wuhan market that traded in exotics, these wild animals, maybe there to, for immunity and longevity, all these purported benefits of wild animal parts, when indeed they may have triggered this worldwide pandemic. So one can certainly say the way we treat animals can have global public health implications. In the case of here, with SARS, with MERS, with HIV from the bushmeat trade, mad cow disease in terms of the cannibalistic feeding practices, swine flu, bird flu, on down the list, deforestation playing a role in these hemorrhagic fever viruses, Ebola, etc. But we don't know exactly patient zero. Was it a meal? Was it, some unknown kind of bad exposure? We're not sure. So, yeah, all right. But obviously, and for people that missed my webinar, my 4-hour webinar, all the facts, all the take-homes are in the blog today, my blog today on NutritionFacts.org. If you go to resources, go down to COVID-19, and you can read my blog, and I go through the emergence of COVID-19 and what we know so far. Whew. Okay, I'm glad we have an hour here. Sorry, I'm taking so long to answer these questions. Vamshi Rohan Ramadidi says, are the infections coming from plant viruses as serious as ones coming from animals? That's funny. So I have a video called eating outside your kingdom or something. There is a reason that you don't know anyone that's ever gotten Dutch elm disease. There's a reason you don't get a really bad case of aphids. And that's because the pathogens that have evolved to attack plants are incapable of attacking people, speaking broadly. And in fact, the closer by eating, for example, primates in the bushmeat trade, we're exposing ourselves to primate adapted pathogens, and maybe easier than than eating, if we ate another kind of animal that's farther away from us evolutionarily. And plants are an entire different kingdom. There's the animal kingdom, there's the plant kingdom. And so by eating outside of our kingdom, then one doesn't have to worry about these foodborne diseases, these infectious diseases, because they evolved to attack animals. So that's why there's food safety risks associated with animal product consumption that aren't associated with plant consumption. Of course, look, if some chicken juice dripped on the conveyor belt and got your raw broccoli, and you ate the broccoli, you can get salmonella, E. coli, these fecal intestinal pathogens. But obviously, broccoli doesn't have intestines. It didn't come from the broccoli, but it may have come from animal agriculture, even if through kind of contamination. All right, so you don't have to worry about getting infected with like the tobacco mosaic virus or something. Okay, Katie Rose the Turtle asked, would inflammation lowering foods help with COVID symptoms by fighting inflammation in the lungs? Again, great question, right? Well, if this, acute respiratory distress syndrome and severe cases of COVID-19, if that's inflammation, wouldn't we want to kind of tamp down the inflammation? But inflammation is an immune reaction. The reason when you get a splinter in your finger and it gets red, hot, painful, swollen, that's inflammation. That's actually a good thing. I mean, that's your body's way of fighting the bacteria that came in on the splinter. And so inflammation is, so this is like a flip side. When you hear negative aspects of inflammation, they're talking about the smoldering inflammation of chronic disease, this low-grade chronic inflammation that plays a role in chronic diseases like diabetes and high blood pressure and heart disease and many of our leading killers. That's why you often hear people talking about anti-inflammatory foods, eating an anti-inflammatory diet. But we're talking about this low-grade inflammation, not the acute inflammation of infection, which may actually be a good thing. For example, one of the reasons we don't want to treat fevers unless we absolutely have to is because fever is actually a good thing. Fever is our body's defense mechanism, and that's why giving antipyretics like Tylenol and ibuprofen, not a good idea when it comes to respiratory infections. Makes you feel better, but it undercuts your body's ability to fight. So if you have a fever, cool cloth on the face makes you feel better without dousing your virus-fighting internal heat. Okay, Kinestar says, I heard COVID-19 can only multiply on an acidic environment, like people who eat animal products, rather than an alkaline system, as plant eaters do. Is that true? That is not true. And what you eat doesn't change the pH of your lungs. What you eat changes the pH of your urine. So if you eat acidic foods like animal products, then the pH of your urine will change. I have a funny video talking about how you can test your urine with purple cabbage. If you eat lots of plant foods, particularly dark green leafy vegetables, then your pee turns alkaline. Why does it matter what pH your pee is? Well, it matters in terms of the kidney stone formation, may play a role in muscle wasting as we age, things like that. So, I mean, yes, there can be benefits, but when you're talking about alkaline producing or acid forming foods, your body doesn't change pH. In fact, the only time your body actually significantly changes pH is basically in the ICU right before you die. Doctors get what's called an ABG, an arterial blood gas. And when your pH is way off, that's a sign that you may not have long. So our pH is kept within a very narrow range, regardless of what you eat. And so it shouldn't matter in terms of what the pH of your urine is doing. Okay, David Fartels asks, are children asymptomatic after getting COVID-19 or don't they get the virus at all? Children can become infected, but they tend to suffer a mild or asymptomatic course. Very similar things we're seeing with past coronavirus outbreaks. That's a great question as to why. I actually have a whole section that I covered in my webinar. Oh, I actually did cover it in my webinar. So if you look at the blog today, I talk about the various theories as to why children don't get serious illness. The question is, can they transmit the infection? Even though we know they don't get very sick, what role do they play in transmitting the illness? And that that's very important in terms of school closings. For influenza, children are prime spreaders of the flu, whether pandemic flu, seasonal flu. And so something like school closing is very effective in stopping the spread of the flu. However, we don't know what role children are playing in the spread of COVID-19. And so, closing schools is kind of controversial because it prevents frontline medical workers, about a third of which have small children at home who may not be able to join the workforce if their children are at home. Okay, so Paul N. Sharp says, any COVID-19 studies done at Loma Linda? I have no idea. Mark Edwards says, what is your take on these people taking colloidal silver? They are at risk of hurting themselves. We should never ingest silver. There's actually a disease, a silver overload disease. Your skin turns color and has other negative implications. Do not ingest silver. Period. Okay, all right. V for Vegdetta says, it's better for us all to basically get it so then we become immune, or for us to avoid getting it and wait for the vaccine. Do not get this intentionally. So yes, if you have no pre-existing conditions, and in your 30s or 40s, the chance of dying from the disease are like 1 in 1,000, which sounds low, but 1 in 1,000 chance of dying, that's terrible. I mean, think about the things we do, like wearing our seatbelt and things that are much lower. We take precautions for much lower chances of dying. And so, yes, although young, healthy people tend not to suffer serious courses, there have been deaths at young ages. There have been very severe cases requiring intubation. So we should not risk it. What we should do is we should wait until enough people have become infected such that the virus has no more kindling, and immune people, if they do indeed become immune, act as fire breaks, the so-called herd immunity, or so either the virus stops through mass infection or through mass vaccination. Hopefully by the end of 2021, we'll have a vaccine. And so then you can get the benefits of infection, immunity, ideally, without the downsides of infection, disease, and death. Do not get infected. And God, even if you did survive, you have if you are infected, you have risk of hurting other people by infecting other people, and you don't even know you're infectious until even before you start showing symptoms. And so it's just a bad idea all the way around. Okay. Brian Falvey says, can you talk about the safety of eating raw produce? Can I eat them raw? Is it safe? How do I wash them? Would they be contaminated, etc.? Okay. So as I said in the Facebook thing earlier, there has not been a single confirmed case of someone who's staying at home, not having a contact with people outside their household, and becoming infected from delivered groceries or delivered takeout food. Think about what's going on now. Millions of people are getting their groceries delivered, are getting takeout, and not a single confirmed case of someone getting it that way, which suggests to me that the infectious dose perhaps required is so high that, any traces of the virus that might come from someone being unintentionally, exposing themselves. They're sick, they don't know it. They have virus on their hands. They're touching packaging, which eventually finds its way into your house. Perhaps there's just not enough viral load to actually cause an infection. So that should ease everyone's concerns that it presents a risk. However, there's a theoretical risk if someone right before handing you a package or something, has it, coughs on their hand, touches the package, you immediately touch the package, and then pick your nose or something without washing your hands. Theoretically, that could do it. And so I encourage, after you put away your groceries, don't, while you're putting away your groceries, don't touch your mucous membranes, your eyes, nostrils, or inside of your mouth, and wash your hands afterwards, throw away the, exterior packaging, etc. But that's really out of this just abundance of excess caution. Again, we don't know of a single case in which someone's been infected that route. And so hopefully that will ease people's concerns. Okay. What about hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, and zinc? Oh, okay. And so there have been these small, uncontrolled studies on hydroxychloroquine. It would be wonderful if this drug, this cheap, readily available malarial drug, of which they have lots in the global south, if it was effective, that'd be fantastic. However, we do not have these, randomized controlled trials. That's what you need. There's the Solidarity trial, of which one arm is hydroxychloroquine, run by the World Health Organization. We're going to have good data soon. We don't have it yet. And these are not benign drugs. No drug is benign. There are risks, there are benefits. Until we know there are confirmed benefits, one may not want to take the risks. In terms of zinc, I talked at length about zinc. Again, I would refer you to my notes. I have a whole section on zinc in today's blog. Bottom line, I don't think zinc will help because the zinc lozenge in your throat isn't, even if it did, decrease the replication of the virus as it does under certain circumstances in vitro, that class of viruses, that's not where we want to reduce the replication. It's in your lungs where the zinc doesn't get to. Yes, taking zinc pills can reduce pneumonia death rates among children in the developing world, but we don't have data suggesting that people who are well nourished, like people who are eating healthy, who presumably have enough zinc, whether taking extra zinc will actually have any benefit in terms of immune boosting. Having said that, if taken as directed, I don't suspect it would hurt, although it can cause nausea on an empty stomach. Okay, Brad White Cox is just answering somebody else. Bill Duchette says, videos of doctors being directed to report causes of death when people was never tested or had symptoms. My opinion, they're trying to max virus death totals. That sounds like some conspiratorial thinking. This is a real disease causing real death, real destruction, and it is to suggest that it is somehow being overblown is an insult to the frontline medical workers who are putting their lives on the line. There have been 9,000 healthcare workers. It just came out, CDC this week published 9,000 cases of infection among healthcare workers. Hundreds have died worldwide. Over 100 have died worldwide, and including the whistleblower who was warning of the SARS-like disease out of the Wuhan market, and was dead, age 33, less than 2 months later. And so, I mean, we can argue about case fatality rates, but one cannot argue about the seriousness of this pandemic. It is shaping up to be a category 2 or 3 pandemic on the CDC's pandemic severity index. And so worse than the 2009 swine flu pandemic, much less serious than the 1918 category 4 or 5. Okay. Josh Bassetti, can you talk about asthma and COVID-19? Asthma is assumed to be a risk factor. Lots of things have been assumed to be risk factors. Vaping, asthma, I mean, the active smoking, things that you would just assume would hurt your lung defenses. But in terms of, tens of thousands of confirmed cases and what actually is a risk factor for severe course or death, the ones we have so far are COPDs, the worst, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases like emphysema, also heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, and obesity, or really just being overweight. A BMI of 28 puts one at risk. That means more than half of America has so much excess fat that they're at significantly higher risk of a severe course of COVID-19. So those we know, and some of these other purported risk factors are just kind of theoretical at this point. We don't have that data backing it up. Okay, question mark asks, what about widespread vitamin D deficiency and immune system regarding COVID-19 spread? What about vitamin D bolus doses for therapy? There's actually a paper released recently by Grant suggesting we should be giving, that people should be taking extra vitamin D to protect themselves from infection, and indeed boluses for treatment. But that is, again, theoretical. We have no basis to base that on for this specific disease. Yes, there are, we do know that vitamin D does play a role in immune function. In fact, one of the reasons why certain seasonal respiratory viruses like the flu are seasonal, one of the factors, maybe host factors, is more vitamin D, higher vitamin D levels in the summer in the Northern Hemisphere. That may be one of the multitude of factors for the seasonality of respiratory infections. And so, but it's never been put to the test. And so I would not recommend people do anything differently in terms of their vitamin D supplementation. But I do think, having enough vitamin D is critical. If you're not getting enough adequate sun, which many people aren't, perhaps these days, more than usual, I recommend 2,000 international units of vitamin D3 a day. Lionel, where'd she just go? There we go. Excuse me. Leonat Pula says, does garlic consumption effectiveness against pneumonia you showed in a video have similar effects in COVID-19 induced pneumonia? You know, when you eat garlic, the reason you have garlic breath when you eat garlic is not because you have garlic residue in your mouth. In fact, if you took garlic, I'm not recommending this, but if you took garlic and stuck it up your rectum, you would develop garlic breath. Why? Because those garlic compounds are absorbed into your system, circulate throughout your body, and then are exhaled. These volatile compounds in garlic are exhaled through the lining of your lung and exhaled in your breath. And that has been used to explain why there were, I talked about a trial in children, how garlic consumption could, decrease, do something beneficial in terms of childhood pneumonia by eating garlic. I'd have to go back and look at that video. Okay, again, works against typical pneumonia pathogens, which tend to be bacterial. So does that mean it works against viral pneumonias? Does it mean it works against COVID-19? We have no idea. Having said that, no downside to eating garlic unless you're getting elective surgery in the next week or so, because it does thin your blood a little extra, but probably not a lot of elective surgery these days. Okay, Marla McGovern asks, based off past pandemics, what is proven to be the best method to get back to a societal normal? What might be different this time around due to the factors unique to COVID-19? So we're really facing, in terms of overall impact, the worst pandemic we've had in a century. The best parallels in terms of kind of the societal shutdown was the flu pandemic of 1918, where we see, for example, cities that earlier and more rigorously and for longer instituted these social distancing measures like closing down theaters, etc., did seem to do better than cities that didn't. And so that supports our kind of social distancing strategies to flatten the curve. But in terms of normalcy, what happened is there was a mild spring wave, and then it came back viciously in the fall, and that killed most people in the fall. Some places there were 2 or 3 waves going on into 2019, even 2020. But that's influenza. That's a disease that we know tends to kind of disappear in the northern hemisphere during the summer. We don't know what's going to happen with this coronavirus. All we can do is let science be the guide, let the data be the guide. And so basically what we're looking for is this kind of theoretical mathematical construct called R naught, which is the basic reproductive number. The reason they call it the reproductive number, it actually comes from demography, the early study of population growth, where it was like how many average children the average woman has. But that's been in the infectious disease context, basic reproductive number means the number of people a single infected person tends to infect in a susceptible population. So basically, it's a measure of kind of the contagiousness of a new virus. And so the reason we were able to stop, for example, MERS, the last deadly outbreak of a coronavirus in 2012, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, is that the reproductive number was 1, meaning every person that got infected, on average, only infected one other person. You can see how much easier it would be to stop that kind of outbreak versus something with an R naught, basic reproductive number, of 2 or more. And then we see exponential growth, where one person infects 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16. You can see how they can get out of hand very quickly. And so what we basically need to do is break as many chains of transmission as possible by keeping people indoors and not mixing with others as much as possible. And that will drive that basic reproductive number down, hopefully to under 1, meaning every person infects less than another person. That's how we slow down, stop. And once we see that happening, then we may be able to start relaxing some of these social distancing guidelines until, it creeps back up. And once the R naught hits 1, starts going over 1, we got to clamp down again. So it's basically, we can be kind of pumping the brakes. And the reason we want to slow down the rate of people getting infected is because we don't want to overwhelm the medical system. We want there enough ventilators to go around should you suffer a severe course and need help breathing. And so that's one way this could go. It depends. The critical piece is how immune do people get once they get the infection. So we're assuming at some point enough people will be infected and immune that the virus will kind of stop on its own. That may not happen until we have a safe, effective vaccine, if that ever happens. Based on the common cold coronaviruses, there are 4 common cold coronaviruses that infect people. They tend to only cause relatively short-term immunity, like 45 weeks. If COVID-19 is like those, then we should see this new Harvard study suggests we should see social distancing on to 2022. Hopefully that is not the case. And hopefully we have robust immunity. Of course, this all is based on our ability to test people, to know how much infection is there out there. And we do that by doing these random samples in the population to see how many people have exposure to this virus. That is currently being done. It's already been done in Germany and Iceland. And hopefully we'll have some data here in the US so we can track the spread of this disease to let that guide our moving forward. Okay. Jalo says the name of the virus is SARS-CoV-2, not COVID-19. Absolutely. I should say COVID-19 virus or COVID-19 coronavirus. The reason I don't say SARS-CoV-2 is because people may confuse it with SARS and be like, wait a second, I'm interested in COVID-19, not SARS. Anyway, okay, but that's why I talk about the COVID-19 virus rather than SARS-CoV-2, which is SARS coronavirus 2, whereas the virus that caused SARS is SARS coronavirus. So it's a similar severe acute respiratory syndrome, but caused by a completely different virus. I know it can be a little confusing. Noah Schilling says, is our interaction with animals making these diseases worse than it would be if we didn't exploit them? Will the next pandemic be worse than this? It certainly could be. This may just be a dress rehearsal. And so when I talked about a category 2 or 3 pandemic, so the CDC has this pandemic severity index, very similar to the hurricane severity index. So like a category 5 hurricane is like sustained 150-mile-an-hour winds, the so-called super typhoon. that is a case fatality rate of 2% or more. So that's about right where the 1918 pandemic was. Once you get about 2%, then we're talking about millions of Americans dying. That's a Category 5 pandemic. The last pandemic in 2009, swine flu, was a Category 1 pandemic, only killed about 500,000 people around the world. Whereas the COVID-19 is shaping out to be a Category 2 or 3, that's differentiated by 0.5% case fatality rate. If it's above that, it could be a Category 3. Below that, it'd be a Category 2. The 2% fatality of the worst pandemic in human history, in fact, the worst disease event or any event, right? No war, no famine, no plague ever killed so many people in so short a time as the 1918 pandemic. Again, only around 2% case fatality rate. We learned a few decades ago, 1997, that there was a flu virus. 60 million people, up to 60 million Americans get the flu every year. What if it turned deadly? Well, in 1997, we used to think the worst flu could do was 2% fatality. In 1997, a virus in chickens, H5N1, emerged with over 50% mortality rate. More than half the people that got it died. Thankfully, only at least the first, a few hundred people got it. But if you did get it, then it's like a flip of a coin whether you're going to live or not. That changed how we thought about pandemic risk forever. Wait a second. If we could have a virus as transmissible as the flu and as deadly as Ebola, that's just civilization threatening. Currently, the top pandemic threat, according to the CDC, is an H7N9 bird flu virus, killing about 40% of the people that it's infected so far. Overtook H5N1 in 2013. And those viruses are indeed a product of industrial poultry production, just like the swine flu pandemic in 2009 was a result of industrialized pork production and live animal transport. And I'm going to talk a lot about that in my book. If you're interested in the science behind that, this is not just my opinion. This is the opinion of the World Health Organization, the United Nations, and the world, the leading veterinary authority on the planet, the OIE. I have a review published in Critical Reviews in Microbiology, an invited review, where I go deep into the science for those who are kind of scientifically minded. But I will be releasing that all in kind of lay form in my book that'll be out May 26th. And you can pre-order it now by going to NutritionFacts.org, click down on resources, down to COVID-19 resources, and click the pre-order button. You can pre-order an audiobook and on ebook, and all proceeds I receive from this book will be going to charity, as with all my books. Joanne B says, do I take flu vaccines every single year because I don't want to hurt anyone? As a relatively young, healthy person, the risk for me for the flu is typically just being out of work for a few days, but the flu can be deadly for older adults, young children, and so I would never want to put anyone at risk. That's why it's important to get the flu vaccine every year. In fact, I'm such a believer in our vaccine capacity that I volunteered at the National Institutes of Health to get experimental bird flu vaccines. I actually have, maybe antibodies circulating to H5N1 in my system right now because I took signed up from so many vaccination trials performed under Dr. Berger at NIH, because we ideally should get a vaccine out before the pandemic strikes, so we don't have to wait 18 months like we're doing here for COVID-19. All right. Deb Halling says, what about intravenous vitamin C? I talk about the controversy surrounding intravenous vitamin C for cancer. I have a whole series of videos. We have no data on intravenous vitamin C for not just COVID-19, but I don't think for any infectious disease. Although, no, there is intravenous vitamin C and shock. Is it septic shock? I don't know if it's septic shock or cardiogenic shock, but either way, not directly applicable to the current situation we are in. Okay, Alicia Godfrey says, can non-washable masks be set in direct sunlight to kill any viruses that might be on them? Non-washable masks. So UV radiation does the coronaviruses in general, as well as influenza viruses, are susceptible to UV radiation. But when I was looking at those studies, I found it difficult to. So in a lab, you can blast them with enough UV rays at a certain intensity, at a certain wavelength for a certain amount of time and destroy the virus. But it's difficult to translate that into the intensity of UV rays wherever you are, right? So it depends what latitude you are. It depends on a whole variety of what time of day it is. And so that's why it's hard to translate that lab data into, how much time at home. Probably the best thing to do would be heat. So you can effectively sterilize a mask from COVID-19, exposing it to 7 degrees Celsius for 5 minutes. That's about 168 degrees Fahrenheit, which is not that hot. That's like hot tea. Like, right? I mean, I have a little, I'm such a tea geek. I got like the little, electric pot or whatever, and I can make it any temperature I want. And I put my tea at 160, 170. And it's that temperature, 5 minutes, completely inactivates the COVID-19 virus. And so, your mask isn't going to burst into flames, or the rubber or the elastic or whatever shouldn't melt or anything. That's probably the easiest way at home. Now, in hospitals, they can use this, fancy, basically like gaseous hydrogen peroxide and stuff. But at home, heat's probably the best way. And of course, if it's a cloth mask or something, you just wash it with detergent, throw it in the washing machine, and you should destroy it that way. Okay. Okay. Just random comments here. C. Rodriguez says, is it okay to start a new exercise regimen at this time? Should you continue aerobic exercise if you start showing symptoms? Oh, that's interesting. That is actually an interesting question. So should you start a new exercise regimen? I have videos talking about the criteria at which you want to have medical approval before starting an exercise regimen, but something like walking, basically anybody can do. And so that's a kind of a good way if you haven't been exercising at all. And what should you do when you start showing symptoms? You should let your symptoms be your guide. First of all, obviously, we don't want to be exposing anybody. We should not be going outside if we have symptoms. But in terms of, can we be doing squats or something in our holed-up quarantine room? We should really let symptoms be our guide. And probably your body will not want you to be doing squats. And you should listen to your body, sleep when you're tired. And usually there's this kind of feeling of malaise, and that's your body's way of keeping you away from other people. And it's probably a good time to let your body mobilize its energy towards fighting the virus rather than, bulking you up at this point in time. All right. Antonio Soler says, a famous doctor saying recently COVID-19 equals the flu because of similar mortality rates, therefore no social distancing needed. What? Okay. Even if this was the flu, right? You can't have a year's worth of flu victims crashing the ICU at the same time, right? I mean, there's this compression these higher fatality rates that we're seeing, for example, Northern Italy, are because of the breakdown of the medical system. They're overwhelmed, not enough ventilators to go around. That's what we don't want to happen. And so, yeah, even if there was a 1 in 1,000 chance of a really serious course, we've got 327 million people in this country. So that's why we have to flatten the curve. We have to spread out the infections such that our hospitals do not become overwhelmed and they can take care of us the best that they can. Okay, Kokuru Nagomu says, can negative ion ozone generators affect aerosolized virus particles in the air, like in grocery stores, etc.? I haven't seen any research on that, and I read, or at least skim, every single one of the hundreds of papers that get published every day. I haven't seen anything about that. I believe there was a UV study suggesting that I think in TB wards, there may be a lower risk just because they use these UV lights. But I mean, at such an intensity that you can't look into them or you'd hurt your eyes, that kind of thing. So there's really nothing out there beyond simple ventilation that could help clear the virus out of the air. So if you're at home and you're infected, you should have the windows open. You should have the bathroom fan on. And if you have an air filter, you should be running that as well. Again, trying to keep the air circulating. All right. There's an all caps message. I'm going to skip that. Oh my God, we're almost out of time here. Okay, what are my thoughts on sauna or contrast showers to improve your innate immune system to help from developing more severe symptoms of COVID-19? Again, we don't know whether boosting specific parts of your immune system are good or bad. Just take common sense measures to support your immune system: sleep, stress management, exercise, healthy diet, until we know more about the disease. Yes, there's all sorts of things you can do to boost parts of your immune system, but until we know which parts we want to boost, which parts we don't want to boost, we don't want to do anything specific. What is happening? Lucidity, it says, what's happening with wet markets now that they seem to be a major risk factor for this virus? There's an open letter from those signed from many health organizations requesting China to stop. China did pass a law January 26th, I believe, closing down these wildlife farms and basically making it illegal to raise, trade, sell wild animals for meat. Okay, so first of all, they're only talking about wild animals, not talking about livestock. And by livestock, they also included rabbits and fish and turtles and things. And so there's still live markets open right now. In fact, some of these exposés that say, look, live markets, there's blood everywhere, all these animals. Yeah, well, those are all considered livestock and so completely exempted from this ban. So those aren't violations of the ban. They were never included in the first place. And a huge loophole is that wild animals can still be traded, bought, sold, slaughtered, etc., for traditional Chinese medicines. So yes, no longer legal to kill and eat pangolins, which may have been it's kind of the prime candidate of suspicion for the intermediate host for this current pandemic. But we can still kill them for their scales. Pangolin blood is said to promote circulation. You can go online and buy bat feces from China for like $35 a pound for eye disorders. You can put bat feces in your eye. I mean, it's crazy. All completely legal, continues to be legal. And so we really need to shut down the wildlife trade entirely. And look, even if just, and it's not enough for China to do it, other countries need to as well. Vietnam is the only other country that has taken China's lead in terms of wildlife meat, but it needs to be done across the board because risky practices anywhere are a threat to people everywhere because, a virus is one plane ride away, 24 hours from any city on the planet. So we need to prevent the emergence of pandemic viruses in the first place. It's been a major theme of my upcoming book coming out next month. All right, Julot says, the French paradox. Okay, that's something about the French paradox. Matthew Will says, can there be any long-term health effects of those infected? Oh, that's an excellent question. So SARS. So if you look back at SARS, 6 months after SARS, they did CT scans of survivors. And they found significant lung damage. I think 1 in 3, again, it's in my notes, my webinar notes on my blog today. And I think 1 in 6 had a significantly impaired lung function 6 months out. So they thought they recovered fine, but they actually have these scarred up lungs. So yes, there may indeed be long-term negative consequences for COVID-19. Yet another reason we don't want to get infected. So do not intentionally get infected. Oh my God, that's a terrible idea. All right, unfortunately, I've got an interview at 7:00. So I've got to run. Sorry I couldn't get to more of your questions. I will be doing another hour of questions next week, next Thursday. If you want to know when, subscribe to Nutrition Facts, or just go to the website, Nutrition Facts, next Thursday, and there'll be a banner giving both the links for YouTube and Facebook. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay home and stay safe.